Hello and welcome to the Miraculous Lightworkers channel, your go-to place for all things about lightworkers and enlightenment. I'm your host, Wendy. Today we're going to be covering step 3 from Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous, and we're going to start with Freedom from Our Addictions, the Russellbrand book about recovery. The reason I'm covering this on my channel is because of my life experience, and when I asked in prayer and meditation how I can be of most use to God's children, I kept getting this message come through that there are a lot of people who are struggling with addiction who should be in mission as light workers, but they're not, simply because they are feeling inadequate. They feel like they're too messed up. They feel like they're not capable or worthy of giving their message to the world. And we are coming to a point when that's no longer so much of an option. Our world is moving into ascension. God needs all hands on deck. So I'm really glad that I can be a channel this way, because I have a lot of life experience pertaining to addiction, being surrounded by addiction throughout a lot of my life. And so I really want to share this with the world. I think that the time is now. Whatever your drug of choice, your poison of choice, your mental addiction, you can benefit from the 12 steps because it's a plan of action to get out, basically. It's finding yourself in a place where you don't want to be anymore when you're in addiction, and you need a hand, you need a guide to come through. This is just a roadmap, you want out? You've been thrown a life preserver in this way. So I'm going to start with chapter 3. I'll show it to you, but if I say it, the algorithms on YouTube will make sure that I can never monetize a video or kind of push you out of position because they don't like curse words. But straight up, for most addicts, that's not really an issue. They feel like life's a curse, so. Step 3. We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. I did this step with help from an atheist, and at the point I took it, I would probably have said I was an atheist too. The step stripped of reference to divine power becomes, you don't know what you're doing, and you'd better make a decision to accept help. This is a big stumbling block for many addicts. To flash forward to the present day, or to stay where you already are, if you're not a time traveler, I am now on step 12, part of which is to help others. So I spend a significant amount of my time around addicts at various stages of recovery. When I encounter addicts that are still using, it is fascinating to observe which of the 3 steps will be the obstacle that prevents them from realizing change. If it's step 1, that means they flatly deny they have a problem. There's nothing wrong with me, they say. I like drinking in the daytime, or cocaine keeps me thin. Honestly, they say mad stuff like that. There's not much you can do in these cases except admire the battlements of the fortress of self-imposed unawareness. Okay, so before I move forward, I'm just going to share a little bit. I used to host women's meetings for NA, and a lot of times, no matter what meeting you're in, you'll hear, the Nile ain't no river in Egypt, because it is so all-encompassing when you're in it. To find your way out of this particular hole is just unbelievable. It's just you're dug so deep in it, you believe your own lies, and you don't see the problem with what you're doing. I still have people in my family that are so deep in their addiction that to try to convince them that they really have a problem, and that they're not so much even that they have a problem, like they know they have a problem, but they're like, well, I'm functional, I can control it. And it's like, no, you can't. You're ruining all your relationships in your life because you think you can control it, and you're managing to destroy yourself slowly. I remember hearing Thich Nhat Hanh give a speech on this, and he was talking about how You don't have that right to take yourself out like that, essentially. He said, look how many people have invested in you up to this point, how truly fortunate you are to have been brought to this point. In Asian culture where he's from, this makes a lot more sense in context, but he's basically saying, look how many people have sacrificed for you to get to this point in your life. How dare you to deny all of humanity the gift that is in you because you feel like you're entitled to destroy yourself. The world needs you, is what he was trying to say. He was a powerful light worker, and he changed my life a lot. If you don't know who Thich Nhat Hanh is, look him up. Look up the Great Bell Chant if you can't pronounce or spell his name. The Great Bell Chant will take you to a lot of information about Thich Nhat Hanh. His life was incredible. If you want to know about, really truly inspirational people who walk this planet, he's one of the greatest light workers that ever lived. I'm going to go ahead and continue here. When step 2 is the obstacle, they know they have a problem, admit it, but cannot come to believe that there is a better way. They say things like, I need to drink, it's the only thing that keeps me sane, or I can't imagine life without drugs. Well, they don't say it like that, but when confronted with this, I can only share with them my own story. Identify with their lack of hope, but tell them, in my experience, change is possible, that my current life is proof of that possibility. So you're talking about coming out of a place where you're really committed to having a lifestyle that involves a particular poison. And I'm just going to go ahead and extend this a little bit and say this also applies to people who suffer from food addictions, who suffer from sex addictions, who suffer from, whatever it is that is your particular malady. It applies. You get used to this way of being, and you get real committed to it. Real committed to keeping it a part of your experience. And you don't see a way out. You can't imagine, how do I do life differently than this now? This is how I function. I'm addicted to spending money. I'm addicted to eating bad food. I'm addicted to looking at porn. I'm addicted to, just name it. Are you a heroin addict like Russellbrand was? Maybe it's cocaine. A lot of people get sucked into that hole. And a lot of people that I was surrounded by growing up got really sucked into that. And it was like, wow, how did this even happen? Well, because it was on a different level. At least I'm not as bad as these other addicts. It's a common sort of reference for people who are like, well, it's, I don't do that one because that's a poor man's drug, that kind of thing, right? He's talking about how it's like, how do we justify these things and make it sound like it's less bad in our own life? But that just really sort of cements it in place, We'll all come up with different obstacles for why we believe we deserve to have our particular, poison, whatever that is. But change is possible. When you decide that you're tired of how that thing is messing up your life, when you decide to be humble enough to realize that even if I thought I had control over it, this thing will eventually kill me. It's hurting me. That's when you get to step 2. All right, it's like mercy. I admit it. Okay, I got a problem and I need help and I can't undo it myself. But step 3 is a little bit, we'll move into step 3. You'll see why step 3 is a little bit different. When people are resistant to step 3, it means they accept they have a problem. They believe change is possible, but they think they will author the change through self-will, determination, guts, moxie, cunning, whatever it is. They will do it themselves. They will say things like, I know I can do this, or I can beat this thing, or I've got this far on my own. I'm going to keep going. In such cases, I point out that all these attributes upon which they are planning to depend have been long present and have little use so far. I love his next paragraph here. It says, I struggled with each step and took them like a vet-bound dog. In fact, when I first saw them written down, I ignored them successfully and took giant leaps in the contrary direction, which of course, downwards. I was afraid of change. For better or worse, I had devised a strategy for survival, a means of coping with my feelings, and I was terrified of what I might find if I relinquished it. Okay, that last sentence is basically everything. All right, most people, they like going with what they got because at least they feel like they have some sense of control. But if you find yourself in a place of addiction where you really are not succeeding in balancing out your life, if you have no balance because of any substance, or it could be that mind addiction, a lot of people are, they have codependency problems and stuff like this where they're like, well, if that person doesn't accept me and doesn't approve of me, I can't be happy because I depend on their approval of who and what I am. In the Course in Miracles, it comes down to a problem of understanding that you're getting a false narrative on what you really are. You have a lot of labels that speak to who you think and say you are, but at the core, it's like layer upon layer upon layer of not truths about who and what you really are. And if you knew those things, if you really knew those things, you probably wouldn't be here at this point where you're like, oh my gosh, my life's unmanageable and I need other people's approval, and because you would know exactly what you are. This is kind of what happens in addiction that's really insane to me, watching it and having experienced it, is that you go so far down this avenue of destruction. It's like you're just in complete confusion about who you are, what you're here for. All of it just becomes this really bizarre sort of out of whack experience where if you had known, which none of us really knows coming into this world, we get our labels and things from our parents, right? If you had known, you never could have tried to poison yourself. Even with mind addictions, those are poison to your spirit. It's just that most people do not receive it that way. They say, well, what's the problem with seeking approval from other people? The problem is you're not valuing yourself, and you'll be willing to undermine yourself, to such a degree that you will lose yourself, just like in drugs and other addictions. So it's really not that different when you get down to the core of what's really happening. And addiction usually puts you on the other end, where you've completely given up on getting any sort of approval, and you feel like life is just so messed up that I don't care what anybody thinks anymore. I'll do whatever I want, regardless of how that's affecting anybody around you. And it will affect everybody around you. We're all doing this, thing. We're all in, how about you would call it, we're all in the same canoe. One person does something, it affects everybody else. And so it's important for everybody to work. I love the reference to this. My dad used to work at the International Festival of Canoes, and I learned so much from all these master carvers coming in from around the world and trying to explain the culture of what it means to paddle and to paddle together. It's really apropos when it comes to certain, things in life, such as addiction. One person starts paddling, everybody feels it, So I'm going to skip forward in chapter 3 and just give you a little bit from the end of this. He does these practices at the end of each chapter, and I'm not going to cover the actual practices. What I'm going to cover is something else that I think is really interesting. So if we jump forward here, we're on page 59. My plan operated in confinement. My plan walked with heavy steps in a deep, well-trodden trench dug by the years of unconscious trudging. This is just his dialogue here. His self-dialogue is hilarious. I'm not sure if I can do this in a russellbrand voice. It's funnier when I do. How about another plan? No way. Sigh. Let's look at step 1 again. Okay. So you see, look, you admitted it. Yes. Okay, that's very good. Now step 2. It could be better than this, couldn't it? Yes, we did agree to that, yes. Excellent. Now very slowly, what is it about your plan in your head, using your brain, the brain you've always had, that you think is going to, this time, more than all other times, which we saw in step 1, never ever work? What is it about you and your plan that is so hard to let go of? Well, it's my plan. I thought of it. And that is very nice, but it doesn't work. We proved it. I tell you what, how about a compromise? Oh, yes, please. I love compromises. Why don't we try a new plan, just for today? And if you don't like it, you can go back to your old plan. Oh, okay. Okay then. Ha! Got him. Just for today, would you be willing to consider a different plan? Would you be prepared to follow guidance, to accept help? Are you willing to accept that your previous way has let you down? It isn't your fault. You needn't beat yourself up for not having had a better plan. Just let go. Just let it go. At this point, the possibility for real change is emerging. Real freedom. Everything that has been sought through ineffectual facsimiles is going to become available. I loved his dialogue because that's exactly what happens in the head of an addict. You have everything all figured out, but your life is falling apart for one reason or another. Or you're completely unfulfilled at some level because you're stuck on your plan, your way of doing things. So it's just hilarious because it's like, okay, if I can just bend just a little bit, because addicts are some of the stubbornest people you'll ever meet in your life. Hands down, stubborn to the point that they'd rather die in their addiction than admit that they were wrong. And you have that with non-addicts too, but here's the thing that just tripped me out more and more the more that I learned about this. It doesn't matter how much you say your particular addiction is not an addiction. Everybody has one. We're all equally messed up at some level. Some people, they're addicted to the strangest things. And they'll be like, well, I'm better than everybody else because I'm not addicted to crack. I'm sorry, if you are a, what's the word for that? When they lie, but they don't say, they're addicted to it. Like they lie all the time and they start to believe their own lies. Ooh, somebody put it in the comments if you remember what that is. They call them some sort of a liar, but they're addicted to it. They're addicted to their lies. And there's a chemical thing happening inside of them. Some people are like, well, I'm only addicted to overeating. Yeah, but you're slowly killing yourself. Some people are like, well, I'm only addicted to spending money. At least I'm not stuck on heroin like Russellbrand was. And it's like, at the end of the day, you're trying to do the same thing that any addict is doing, which is, oh man, now I'm in this place of remorse where I need to figure out how to undo the fact that I just way spent outside of my means. I knew what I was about to do, and now I'm hurting my life for it. You know, now I'm gonna have to struggle, and it's causing me stress. Same thing. Same thing. Some people get sucked into pornography, and it's like, well, I'm only just looking at pictures. And it's like, okay, first of all, if you're a light worker and this has come up in your life, which I guarantee there's going to be people who pop on and they're going to be like, oh, I would never. And it's like, yes, you would. We all have our own bent. And at some point, most people in Western culture have looked at these pictures. Okay? So if you do that, it's the same thing in a different way, which is like, look, you are denying your light to somebody. Somebody deserves to have the light that's in you, but you are covering it and isolating and denying your gift, which is even at a prana level, a mana level. If you don't give, you have this power and this light inside of you. And when you share it, you magnify it. You do something like that, It's the same thing as isolating and drinking. It's the same thing as sitting there and binging on a tub of Ben and Jerry's. You know, whatever it is that you call your particular, you know, thing. The ultimate core of what's going on there is you don't value you. This is what's at the bottom of addiction. You would never poison yourself if you valued you. And if you poison yourself with food, or you poison yourself with codependency, depending on other people for their opinions of you, it is poison. If you poison yourself with pornography because you're poisoning your mind by not liberating the light which is within you, you're literally denying the light that wants to flow through you. Everything that comes into your experience that's integrated into you is not just for you. That's why being an addict, there's all this isolation, there's all this hiding, there's all this trying to self-medicate with whatever it is. And it just comes down to basically a chemical storm that's going on in your brain, and you get addicted to doing that. If it's not like alcohol, or it's not heroin, or, you know, et cetera, et cetera. It comes down to you get really accustomed to having that chemical storm go on inside of yourself. And so you're not okay just being you and doing, you know, what spirit wants you to do. You need to try and control the situation by getting this, you know, chemical high. You might just be getting loaded on dopamine from something you're doing out of your own. Your body is like, Deepak Chopra talks about how your body is like this amazing pharmacopoeia. Like, you're capable of producing like 1,400 chemicals or something in your system because of what you bring in. That's why it's so important to bring in good things that don't poison the system or poison the mind, because what you consume through your thoughts, through your eyes, through your behavior, that is affecting what's going on in your pituitary gland, in your, you know, all the parts of your brain where the electrons are firing. All this stuff is part of creating what your whole entire experience is going to be like. It's really pretty sobering, for lack of better words, to think about what your body's capable of when you're not busy trying to destroy it, not devaluing your mind too. It's not just about putting, you know, heroin or something into your veins or drinking alcohol. It's about more than that. It's about valuing the power of your mind. The light wants to come through. For all my light workers out there who are stuck in some sort of addiction, that's the most important thing you can take from this. Even if you shut this video off right now, the whole point is, don't devalue your mind. Your mind is incredibly powerful. Okay? You're here for a reason. Your mind will you know, give you the capacity to do that if you don't abuse it. If you look at it and say, wow, look what I'm capable of. Look at the power that's within me when I activate and magnify that love, when I allow myself to be a channel for that pure divine love to come through, and I'm not busy trying to lock it up and hold on to it and destroy it. That's what's going on with addiction, okay? So in the end of chapter 3, he talks about we're trapped in a way of being that is not working. Here are some categories which will help us amend our perspective. We can usually identify the root of pain and spiritual discomfort within these areas. And I can basically guarantee it's one of these 7. That's why I'm including this. Okay, this comes after the practices, which he puts in the end of the book. He does like mantras and exercises and whatnot. Most important thing, the root of the pain comes from one of these 7, all right? Pride, what I think you think about me. Number 2, self-esteem, what I think about myself. Number 3, personal relations, the script I give to others. So this is like my facade, my mask, right? Number 4, sexual relations, as above pertaining to sex. So it's like how you are dealing with other people, and the gratification that comes from what I think you think about me, and are you validating me, that kind of thing. It's very self-centered, but it's important to recognize, right? Number 5, does it come from my ambitions, what I want in life, my overall vision of my perfect self? Looking at like social drinkers and stuff like this, people who get high together because they're validating each other that way. 6, security, what I need to survive. When you're trapped in a way of being that's centered around security, like sometimes we do these things because it's part of our social situation too. It can be really deceptive because it seems like it works in. 7, finances, money and how it affects my feelings. So if you feel like the money situation is inadequate, is what 7's talking about. Oftentimes we'll try to, instead of affecting change, we're going to try and drown that with something. If I can get that chemical storm happening in my brain, at least for 5 minutes, I'm going to feel better. Unfortunately, all addictions, you end up on the other side of it because you've mishandled the situation, because you've devalued your mind. That is where it comes down to the breaking point where eventually you'll go, oh my gosh, I'm handling this wrong, and I need to find another way because this is really damaging. It's not getting me where I want to be. Ultimately, you just keep at it and keep at it, believing that you can handle this level of dysfunction essentially instead of activating. So it's all about activating light workers. It's all about moving forward. And it's even for people who aren't light workers. This whole series here is just about, you know what, if you know somebody who's stuck in addiction, you can share this with them, because a lot of people won't go into a meeting out of pride. They won't seek help. They won't speak to a counselor because it's so painful to admit what's really going on, to be honest about what's happening inside, because it's feelings of inadequacy. It all comes down to that, So, this is the book for NA, the blue book. Step 3 is really brief here, but I think it's important to cover this, right? So step 3, again stated, is we made a decision to turn our will over and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. What's going on here is that more than just admission that there's a power greater than myself, I'm going to lean into that power. I'm going to admit that I can't do this by myself. That is huge, huge hurdle to come over. So it reads as so. As addicts, we turned our will and our lives over many times to a destructive power. Our will and our lives were controlled by drugs. We were trapped by our need for instant gratification that drugs gave us. Okay, it's going to keep referring to drugs because we're in the NA book, but this would, you know what, change out the item here, whatever it is that is your poison of choice. So you might say, well, I'm not a drug addict. Well, you have an addiction somewhere. I can guarantee it. Everybody does. So just be honest, even if you're just addicted to coffee. The fact of the matter is, if you don't do that for one day, you're going to have a raging headache. You're going to have lethargy because you're not relying on the power that's coming through. And I'm as guilty of this as, the majority of the American population. Caffeine keeps me fueled at times, and I wish that it wasn't, but I'm just being as honest with you as I can, because I can't come to this with a holier than thou sort of attitude. I am as much affected by addiction as anybody else. Even having healed so much and come through my own addictions that were much deeper than caffeine, okay? So on the surface, it's like, what is she talking about? Caffeine as an addiction. Same thing with cigarettes. You call that small kind addiction, but you know what? Try to go a day without your cigarettes. And you get cranky and you start having that fidgety feelings. Try to go a day or a week without looking at porn. Try to go a week without overeating something that you know is toxic to your body. That's what I'm talking about. So don't just, stumble on the word drugs, because your drug of choice can be, that was the word, pathological liar. It can be lying, because it sets off a chemical storm in your brain. Most people don't realize that, okay? I've known pathological liars before. People who could not go without lying. It was part of their makeup and their psyche that they just did it. It was just part of how they rolled, and they didn't know how to communicate without a lie because of that inadequate thing in their own heart and spirit. Okay? So, continuing on, we were trapped by our need for instant gratification that drugs gave us. During that time, our total being, body, mind, and spirit, was dominated by drugs. For a time, it was pleasurable. Then the euphoria began to wear off, and we saw the ugly side of addiction. We found that the higher our drugs took us, the lower they brought us. We faced two choices. Either we suffered the pain of withdrawal or took more drugs. For all of us, the day came when there was no longer a choice. We had to use. Having given our will and our lives to our addiction, in utter desperation, we looked for another way. In Narcotics Anonymous, we decided to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. This is a giant step. We don't have to be religious. Anyone can take this step. All that's required is willingness. All that is essential is that we open the door to a power greater than ourselves. Our concept of God comes not from dogma, but from what we believe and from what works for us. Many of us understand God to be simply whatever force keeps us clean. The right to a God of your understanding is total and without any catches, because we have this right. It is necessary to be honest about our belief if we're going to grow spiritually. Okay, I really have to halt on that for one moment, because a lot of people will stop themselves from moving in recovery because they're like, well, I don't want to be associated with God if that's what it means to, yada, yada, yada. This is where a lot of people come into recovery. They just they have to come to a place of humility where they say, you know what? Whatever will keep me clean, whatever will keep me from destroying myself. I know there's something greater than myself. I'm not willing to say it's this or that. I won't even give it a name. Okay, a lot of people are like that. And whatever it is, okay, if that's the step it takes you to move you forward, perfect. Go with that. Because the source that is greater than you, that made you, that lives within you and animates you, doesn't care what you call it if you have the relationship with it, if you will lean into it and say, you know what? I know you're beyond my understanding, but I want to live. I want a life worth living, and I'm willing to accept help in that endeavor. I'm not going to try and go this alone anymore. Lean not into your own understanding is one verse that biblically, you can apply it anywhere, because it's a principle. When you keep trying to just hang on to your own understanding, you're going to destroy yourself every time. Before I ever accepted my master, I knew that there was a power greater than myself, but it was like I had to go baby steps before I had that relationship, So when you hear about relationship, especially coming into recovery, if you've never done this, it's like it's okay to be where you are. And don't let anybody force feed you their version of what they say is right and true and, absolute. You have to know it for yourself. This is where a lot of believers go wrong anyways, is because they believe a prescription of what is handed to them without knowing it. So there's a belief in the story that was handed to me, and then there is knowing. It's not me believing, it's I know. You are transcending a story and going into that place of not, it's like the doingness versus the beingness of religion. You're doing the motions a lot of times without feeling it in your being and sitting with it and getting to know it and getting comfortable with it, right? So, continue on. We found that all we needed to do was try. When we gave our best effort, the program worked for us as it has worked for countless others. The third step does not say we turned our will and our lives over to the care of God. It says we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. We made the decision. It was not made for us by the drugs, our families, a probation officer, judge, therapist, a doctor. We made it. For the first time since that first high, we have made a decision for ourselves. The word decision implies action. This decision is based on faith. We have only to believe that the miracle that we see working in the lives of clean addicts can happen to any addict with a desire to change. We simply realize there's a force for spiritual growth that can help us become more tolerant, patient, and useful in helping others. Many of us have said, take my will and my life, guide me in my recovery, show me how to live. The relief of letting go and letting God helps us develop a life that is worth living. That's the truth. It's a relief. Surrendering to the will of our higher power gets easier with daily practice. When we honestly try, it works. Many of us start our day with a simple request for guidance from our higher power. Although we know that turning it over works, we may still take our will and life back. We may even get angry because God permits it. At times during our recovery, the decision to ask for God's help is our greatest source of strength and courage. We cannot make this decision often enough. We surrender quietly and let the God of our understanding take care of us. At first, our heads reeled with the questions, what will happen when I turn my life over? Will I become perfect? We may have been more realistic than this. Some of us had to turn to an experienced NA member and ask, what was it like for you? The answer will vary from member to member. Most of us feel open-mindedness, willingness, and surrender are the keys to this step. We've surrendered our will and our lives to the care of a power greater than ourselves. If we are thorough and sincere, we will notice a change for the better. Our fears are lessened and faith begins to grow as we learn the true meaning of surrender. We are no longer fighting fear, anger, guilt, self-pity, or depression. We realize that the power that brought us to this program is still with us and will continue to guide us if we allow it. We are slowly beginning to lose the paralyzing fear of hopelessness. The proof of this step is shown in the way we live. We have come to enjoy living clean and want more of the good things that the NA fellowship holds for us. We know now that we cannot pause for our spiritual program. We want all that we can get. We are now ready for our first honest self-appraisal, and we begin with step 4. Okay, so I'm not moving into step 4. I'm simply covering that because they say it better than I can. When you come into recovery, there's a sense of hopelessness. Most people are brought in, in the way that russellbrand was brought in, like a vet-bound dog. It's like, oh man, I'm in this place doing this thing that makes me feel this way, It's not a happy experience when people first come through the doors. It's like, oh Lord, what do we got now? There's bound to be that struggle, but it's the fellowship. If you've never been into a meeting, there's no way to encourage you enough to just sit with your quietness, come through and listen and understand, oh, I'm not alone in this. I don't have to be embarrassed about all of this, even though most people have done some really deplorable things. before they walk through that. I mean, I don't know anybody who walks into a meeting who hasn't done some deplorable things, okay? But it's about saying, you know what? I'm willing to make that change. I'm going to move into the forgiveness. I'm going to change my life because I'm willing to work the steps. In the program, they say it works if you work it. So how does it go? So work it because you're worth it. I believe that's how it goes. It's like you have to understand how valuable you are in this world. And going hard into addiction robs you of that in such a really savage way. It makes you feel so completely worthless that you give up hope. You don't want to work it because you feel like, what's the point? I've already destroyed my life, right? That's not the truth. In A Course in Miracles, they'll tell you basically that's because you're listening to the voice of ego. Holy Spirit will tell you something very different, but your ego would love for you to buy into that. It would love you to capitulate to that. Your ego is not your friend, okay? That's what dragged you down this road of addiction to begin with. You believing that you were this way or that way, or you need somebody else's validation, that you weren't lovable, blah, blah, blah. You know, everything that your ego loves to lie to you about. Ego's not your friend. But you will learn to thank it for what it's done for you in your life when you realize that it gave you the spiritual growth necessary to get you where you needed to be. And when you don't require it anymore, you can lovingly lay it aside. Say thank you, but I don't need the destruction that you're bringing to me now. I understand you. I understand why you did what you did. And I forgive you. It comes down to forgiveness. Forgiving others, forgiving you a false narrative, forgiving you, yourself, for all the dumb things you did before you decided to get to recovery. Okay? I'm going to read a small bit about it works, how, and why. Only the first couple paragraphs, because I thought, this is really powerful when it comes to step 3, and I just, especially for people who've never looked at any of the literature from the program, you need to hear these words. You need to hear these words, and you need to know what is sort of awaiting you when you're ready and willing to take that step. All right, step 3. We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. The surrender we experience in step 1. Okay, we all remember step 1, right? Step 1 was, I have a problem, coming out of denial, admitting that I have an addiction, an issue that needs to be dealt with. Okay, so surrender we experienced in step 1, coupled with the hope and belief we find in step 2, make us ready and willing to continue on the path toward freedom in Narcotics Anonymous. In step 3, we put our belief in a higher power into action, making a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God of our understanding. Essential to working the 3rd step is our willingness to allow the God of our understanding to work in our lives. We develop this willingness over time. The willingness we experience in our early recovery is valuable, even though we may be willing only to a certain degree. Although this may feel like an unconditional willingness, many of us have discovered that our willingness grew as we learned to trust a power greater than ourselves. Okay, so when it comes to that, basically my understanding of what is really occurring there, okay, is that we don't trust the power greater than ourselves because we've seen so many things happen in our world that would make us doubt. And even for people who've come from a religious upbringing, you can see so much in your life that will put you in a position where you're just in complete distrust and disgust with the world. depending upon how you're, even people who grew up with spirituality, with religion, it's really easy to get it misconstrued and therefore lose your faith, You see it and you're like, yeah, I have heard the words and I've gone through the motions, but ultimately, I see a lot of darkness. And so I'm going to lean into my own understanding of how to come through this because of my misunderstanding of what God is and what God does. It's hard to know, right? We get really wound up in the experience of spirituality sometimes without having a full and complete understanding of, the nature of God. And people can feed you a lot of nonsense storylines too. So, the one thing I can say is truth through and through. Before you, truth was truth, and after you're gone, truth will remain. So, coming to understand that, not just based on the stories that you were given, but on that deep soul level knowingness. That's what it comes down to. That's what will lead you out of darkness. But when we're doing things to get high, whether it's drinking coffee because you're on that chemical high from that, or the behavioral highs, or God forbid, somebody who's messed up on OxyContin or whatever opiates. There's so many these days. There's so many messed up things to try and destroy yourself. It all comes down to the same thing. We're all trying to ease the pain of feeling like we're not in connection with source energy, not relying only on that. So I'm going to read from Just for Today to kind of close this out. Just for Today is like the daily meditation for November 14th. And I think it's really interesting. Every time I dive into this, every time I do a video, it's like, oh, yeah, and that totally speaks to that particular step. So think about step 3 as I'm reading through this, okay? When we were using, our lives became an exercise in survival. Now we're doing much more living than surviving. The text says, I'd be better off dead, a familiar refrain to a practicing addict, and with good reason. All we had to look forward to was more of the same miserable existence. Our hold on life was weak at best. Our emotional decay, our spiritual demise, and the crushing awareness that nothing would ever change were constants. We had little hope and no concept of the life that we were missing out on. The resurrection of our emotions, our spirits, and our physical health takes time. The more experience we gain in living, rather than merely existing, the more we understand how precious and delightful life can be. Traveling, playing with a small child, making love, expanding our intellectual horizons, and forming relationships are among the endless activities that say, I'm alive. We discover so much to cherish and feel grateful to have a second chance. If we had died in active addiction, we would have been bitterly deprived of so many of life's joys. Each day we thank a power greater than ourselves for another day clean and another day of life. Just for today, I am grateful to be alive. I will do something today to celebrate. Sometimes you read one of these and it just hits you in the heart, in such a profound way. I encourage you, if you're not understanding sort of the first step to take to move forward, picking up any one of these texts, but especially the Just for Today book, because we forget how to live when we're stuck in an addiction of any kind. That's the thing. It's like anybody can benefit from this. It's not just people who are profoundly destroyed by a life of chemical addiction that they're copying from a dealer. This is not the same, no matter what level of addiction you're at, understanding what devaluing your mind and trying to destroy your body is doing to everybody in the world around you. That you're literally, when you're in alignment, you're emitting the light of spirit in this beautiful auric field all around you. And that is affecting, alchemy wise, it's affecting everything around you. So you become what is like base metals, and through this beautiful opening to spirit and channeling forward, you become gold. That's what spirit wants from you. That's what life is about. You have come through this much up to this point, not to be defeated by some drug or addictive behavior, whatever it is. You're here now because spirit wants to turn you into gold. He sees what you've been through. And even in denying spirit and pretending that he doesn't see everything you do, he still wants the best for you. That's the craziest thing about, hands down, about getting deep into understanding the Spirit of God, is that you realize I can't hide. And even if I could, I wouldn't want to. Spirit is here now, animating this, moving me forward, showing me the way to do what it is that I came here to accomplish on this planet with my life. And I don't want to hide from that. Even if I could. He's seen me in every moment, every ridiculous, messed up thing that I did in my addiction. Every, horrible word I said. Every underhanded little deed. All those things he saw. And he's not holding it against you. He wants you to come into that place of, Course in Miracles talks about coming into the atonement, accepting the forgiveness, understanding your connection to spirit, and transmuting that dark stuff that you believe makes you unlovable and unworthy as a human being to even have life on this planet. So what's the point of preserving it? Might as well destroy it. Don't really care, right? I'm not worthy of love. I don't see God's presence and his hand in my life, and I guarantee you will the deeper you get in, okay? But this is where an addict's mind is. I don't see his presence on my life. I don't see his hand in this. All I see is darkness. And I can't ground that. It hurts too much. So I'm going to try to cover it. Since I can't ground it, I'll try to drown it. Since I can't come into that knowing in my spirit, I'm going to try to unknow everything that I've learned up to this point. Just kill it. I don't want it anymore. It's too hard to carry that. God gives you the strength to move through that. Whatever you call him. That's the thing about the third step, which is when I say the word God, I feel that pushback sometimes from people. It's like, don't take it with all the history that you're imbuing it with. Take it from a place of truth in your spirit, because you know and remember 100% at your core. If you go deep and you come back to before what everybody told you, you know exactly what that is. And it's not confusing. It's very pure, and it helps you when you get to that place where you come back to the knowing. It helps you to move forward because you're not scared. There's no fear there anymore. It's just love. I know that Spirit loves me. Spirit's not punishing me. Even if I punished me for not understanding, God wants me to be in wholeness so that I can do on this planet with this life what I came for. It comes back down to remembering when you're coming into recovery. Most people, it's like a self-imposed amnesia. You've gotten yourself to a point where you don't know anything. You don't know up from down anymore. You don't know left from right. What am I even doing on this planet? I came for a reason? Oh, all right. I guess I better be about my business then, huh? Trying to remember what in the world did I even come here for. So with that thought, I just want to close out. I'm going to show you the Serenity Prayer. When you go to a meeting, usually they'll close out with the Serenity Prayer, and I'll just say this prayer with you and for you. If you've never heard it, if you've heard it and you need to hear it again, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thank you so much for joining me here on the Miraculous Lightworkers channel. If you struggle with addiction, I pray for you, and I know that you're going to come through this. If you know somebody that you love that's struggling with addiction, share this with them. Or just be there for them. I know it's hard, okay? I've seen a lot of people who they saw people that they loved struggling with an addiction, and because they weren't really sure what to do, they did nothing. And so those people went through a lot of years of unnecessary suffering because nobody knew what to do. And it takes a lot to get somebody through the doors sometimes, you may not know how to carry them through the doors, but it's just time after time after time, you just keep giving them a gentle nudge. For me, I always talk about how I got to this point in my journey, and I call it 1,000 nudges from the universe, 1,000 tiny nudges from the universe to get me to this point, because I had every reason not to succeed. Every obstacle put in front of my path that you can even imagine. I've never really told my story, so one day I will. But right now it's about you. It's about you and the people you love coming through the place of darkness, understanding hope, feeling the hope, knowing that you're not going this alone. There are so many resources. Everything's in the description box down below. Open that up, and if you need to look for a meeting, it's there, okay? If you need online access to literature, it's there. There's helplines. There's no reason another person needs to die in addiction. But you need to understand that even if you don't consider yourself a light worker, what you do today matters. So showing somebody even one of those links, forward them a link. You know what? You don't have to be confrontational. You can just drop them a line and be like, hey, it looks like y'all, you're struggling. I just want to give this to you, just in case. Maybe you don't need it. Maybe somebody you know needs it. The access is there. It's like all of us coming together and linking hands so that we no longer have this gap where people are feeling separated, like they're reaching out, but they don't know what to do. It might just be that. It might be something simple, like a phone number. People are going through crisis and they won't reach out a lot of times because they're embarrassed. Or they've got used to living in a perpetual crisis. Stephen R. Covey talks about management by crisis, running from one to the next instead of managing your life properly. Or just putting out fires as we go. Can't plan it out, can't get above water for 2 seconds to see the horizon and figure out how to proceed. Instead of doing a management by crisis perpetual situation, we can just throw out that lifeline. So that's what I'm encouraging you to do as light workers. Even if you did nothing else today, to really try to help somebody that you love with addiction. Throwing out a lifeline is not necessarily extending yourself or putting yourself in a position where you're going to be hurt by their actions. I understand how addiction works like that, but But straight up, there's no reason another person should have to die in addiction. We should all be coming together as our brother's keepers in that way to bridge the gap. Just give them a number, give them a website, give them a quick line that says, you know, even though we can't be together, I love you and I miss you and I'm thinking of you. Something simple. All right. Peace to you, beautiful light workers. I'm getting a tickle. Join us next time as we uplift, enlighten, and ascend. Bye now.